Hey, shalom, 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 everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the next session of Reading with SHILO, man. SHILO. We in the house. We in the house with On the Real Side by Mel Watkins. And I'm up. And I don't know if y'all up, but I'm up. So we're going to go ahead and get in the next chapter or the next session in the next chapter. We are on chapter 4. We're going to get into section 2. It's going to be a pretty long section, about an hour, hour or so. But I ain't tripping since I'm up. It's pretty cool tonight, man. Hey, the lights on. I don't have to read by candlelight. Oh, shalom, spiritual conversationist. What you doing up? You up? Well, you up? Let's get it. We're going to get it tonight. We're going to get it. We're going to get section 2 of chapter 4 of On the Real Side. Vaudeville and black humor. It's about 7-8 pages in this section. Yeah, glad to see you here. It was good to see somebody up with me. We're going to rock it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, yeah, 8. About 8 pages. 8 pages in section 2. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 pages in section 3. We're only gonna do section 2 tonight. It's gonna be about an hour. About an hour. We'll see. We'll see how it rocks. But so far, so good. We are moving along nicely, one section at a time, one page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time. And so far, man, we almost, well, we're getting closer to the halfway point. We are getting closer to the halfway point. So before we get started, man, for all y'all that catch this on the rebound, welcome to Reading with SHILO. Like, comment, subscribe, tell your people so they can catch me like spiritual conversation is doing right now. Catch me up late with me. But it's all great. All praises to the Most High God. I can be So we're going to seek and see if there's anything that we can learn and grow from in section 2 of On the Real Side. Hopefully it'll be a good flow tonight. A good flow, which I'm feeling good for the most part. I'm up. So we're going to jump into it. Let me know if you can hear me good enough. We'll keep pushing. Section 2 of chapter 4 of On the Real Side. Vaudeville and black humor. Section 2. Traveling black minstrel shows still had their followings and troops such as the Georgia Troubadours, the Rabbit Foot Company, Richard and Pringle's Georgia Minstrels, and Curtis's Afro-American Minstrel Company continued touring rural towns in the South and Mid-East in great success. By the turn of the century, however, these companies have begun to combine other forms of entertainment with their basic minstrel routines. So while I'm thinking about it right now, these last, I want to say, couple of days, man, me and my son been watching the Three Stooges, and something I grew up on, and since reading this book, is definitely making me look at the Three Stooges differently. You know, I call like the beginning of one of the movies, and a lot of the things that the Three Stooges does, it makes me think about the stuff that I've read about here in the minstrelsy. You know, they might not be in blackface, but it's similar. It's the same thing. You know, the slapstick comedy and stuff like that. I can see how, you know, they say that they've taken some of the old minstrelsy stuff and just reinvented it, revamped it, and they push it out. So it seems the same way with the Three Stooges. A lot of stuff seems the same way, especially reading all through all these names of the minstrelsy. Right. Increasingly, road shows that offered more variation in their entertainment format came to the forefront, even in rural areas. Blues singers Ma Rainey began singing intense shows around 1902, and along with Bessie Smith and that Ma Rainey, I knew I saw that too. I think it's on Netflix. It might be on Netflix or Prime. Ma Rainey with the guy that played Black Panther. So and I thought I saw a name in here, which I did. I was correct. So Ma Rainey, I think Ma Rainey might be. Even though I watched it, that might be one to watch as well to get a look at, you know, maybe how some people were done in that time period, coming out of the minstrelsies and, you know, with so-called blacks trying to make their emergence into the entertainment business, so to speak. And the Three Stooges started off the same way. You know, if you watch the movie that shows what they were doing before, you know, they were on TV, they were going um, they were going city to city, almost like a variety show, you know, or minstrelsy, and performing on stage for crowds of people before they became television acts, you know, similar to Amos and Andy and all that. Blues singer Ma Rainey began singing in tent shows around 1902, and along with Bessie Smith, was performing with Wilcott's Rabbit Foot Minstrels by 1915. New Orleans jazz man Bunk Johnson worked with Holcap's Georgia Smart Set from the early 1900s through the 20s. And in 1910, pianist Jelly Roll Morton played with the Macabre and Young Minstrels. Other shows moved even further afield from standard minstrelsy. Black road shows offering non-minstrel entertainment had surfaced as early as the 1870s. The Hire Sisters, for instance, traveled throughout the South presenting serious dramas as well as operatic shows and musical comedies featuring such performers as Billy McLean and Sam Lucas. Emerging at the height of the minstrel popularity, they struggled to find enthusiastic supporters and financial backers. By the 1890s, taste had changed enough that non-minstrel entertainment was welcomed. When white promoter Sam T. Jack introduced his Creole burlesque company in New England in 1890, the troupe became an instant favorite. Although it maintained the three-part format of minstrelsy, the Creole show was more a variety than a minstrel show. Its black cast featured a chorus line of beautiful showgirls, toning down some of the familiar plantation humor and reflecting black migration patterns. The acts assumed an urban ambiance. My bad. The success of the Creole show opened new avenues for black entertainers, and within a few years, musical comedies with black casts began to appear more regularly. In 1895, the black promoter, John W. Isham, who had worked as an advance man for the Creole show, organized his own companies, Isham's Octoroons, which not only presented a series of high-class musical entertainment, but performed well in grand opera and comic opera. Minstrel star Tom McIntosh, or McIntosh, was one of the featured comedians of his presence, of his perform, and was one of the featured comedians, and his performance with his wife elicited high praise from critics. That part right there definitely reminds me of the Three Stooges. Curly, before they became the Three Stooges, Curly was performing with his wife. And then they approached him about joining Mo and not Larry Shim, because it was just Shim and Mo at first. And there was such a rave. That's why Curly was asked to even join with Mo and Shim, because he did such a it was a immediate crowd favorite, him and his wife. And it was like a burlesque act. Curly played the violin and his wife danced for everybody in what you would call, the burlesque form. She wasn't kicking up her legs, but it was pretty much, that type of thing. Both have an intelligent idea of low comedy, one wrote, and their act is full of new and original humor. The following year, Isham opened a more elaborate production called Oriental America, which, according to the Morning Times, a Washington newspaper, was one of the strongest shows on the road. In the same year, Black Patty's Troubadours, starring the acclaimed black soprano Cecil Rita Jones, opened to rave reviews. The Indianapolis Freeman described the show as vaudeville, comedy, burlesque, and opera, interpreted by 50 of the best artists ever organized for this style of entertainment. And Jones is said to have had most of the qualities essential in a great singer: the natural voice, the physical figure, the grand air. The road show that first made a complete break with minstrel tradition was A Trip to Coontown, written by Bob Cole. The show opened in 1896 and toured until 1898, when it debuted in a small theater near Broadway and was hailed as the first musical comedy written and produced by blacks to succeed in New York City. Cole, along with his partner Billy Johnson, also starred in the show. Cole's portrayal of his most famous comic character, the tramp Willie Wayside, brought him instant acclaim. Despite their break with minstrel structure, each of these early shows featured comedy acts that basically adhered to the old minstrel routines. Black-faced comedians such as Tom McIntosh, who appeared at one time or another in the Sam T. Jack and John W. Isham shows, and Bob Cole, stuck with the coon humor that had originated in minstrelsy. So although all black cast shows were developing and expanding, leaving behind some remnants of minstrelsy and adding more authentical black music, the comic image of Sambo remained virtually unchanged. King Rastus, a show developed by the Octoroon Company under the direction of John Isham's brother, Will, in 1900, is a case in point. The show toured briefly with Billy Carson's before it failed. Its biggest drawback was the humor, which apparently offended even those black audiences weaned on minstrels' low comedy. In one bit of character says, "Every nation has a flag but a coon," then unveils a rag with a chicken and watermelon imprinted on it, along with the inscription, "Our rag." The bit was probably based on a song by Will Heelan and J. Fred Helf, "Every Race Has a Flag But the Coon," which was published in the same year and features such lines as, "Now I'll suggest a flag that ought to win a prize. Just take a flannel shirt and paint it red, then draw a chicken on it. with 2 poker dice for eyes, and have a waving razor round his head. To make it quaint, you've got to paint a possum with a pork chop in its teeth. To give it tone, a big ham bone. You sketch upon a banjo underneath. A black critic who saw the show in Memphis, while admitting that whites might enjoy the production, wrote, "As a whole, the show was one of the citizens of this place care not to see repeated. It is a slander on the Negro of America." Smart Set, organized and written by Billy McLean and Ernest Hogan in 1902, the producer, Gus Hill, was white, was another milestone black production, although it offered a few glimpses of private black folk humor in its comedy routines. A traveling musical comedy more than a road show. Smart Set toured successfully for years after Hogan and McLean left. It starred such performers as Tom McIntosh and S.H. Dudley, a competent musician and comedian who later made his mark by forming the first successful booking organization for black performers. During this same period, blacks became more extensively involved in carnivals, tent shows, and circuses, which largely through the efforts of P.T. Barnum had become an American institution by the turn of the century. The big carnivals and circuses performed principally for white audiences, but some feature show sides called dirty shows or jig shows that presented black performers playing for black audiences. What is this? The corner test. Let's see what that is. Corner test. C-O-R. Let me write it down. C-O-R-N-E-T-I-S-T. Corner test. The cornetist, Perry J. Lowry, is usually credited with introducing black vaudeville acts into the circus in 1899. Cornetist. The big man, maybe, I don't know. C-O-R, cornetist. C-O-R-N-E. A cornet. A cornet is a brass wind instrument of trumpet class. A cornist, corniest. It's not in this one. Let's see if it's another one. Before I use that Google. Cornetist. It's not in here either. I hate when I can't find words in the dictionary. Let's see what Google got to offer. Cornetist. C-O-R-N-E-S-T. I mean, my bad. N-E-T-I-S-T. Cornetist. A musician who plays the trumpet. So it did have something to do with the trumpet. The trumpet musician, Perry J. Lowry, or the cornetist, Perry J. Lowry, is usually credited with introducing black vaudeville acts into the circus in 1899. Subsequently, he toured with his own traveling bands and with P.J. Lowry's vaudeville company before permanently associating himself with the circus in 1901. He toured with Barnum and Bailey, Ringling Brothers, and Cole Brothers for the next 3 decades. It was out of the circus and carnival circuit that the most enduring and famous black tent show emerged. According to the black producers and composers, J. Homer Tutt, around 1902, F. Williams, a pioneer black showman, ran into trouble with his dog and pony circus, losing everything except his animals. He met Tut's brother, Salem, Tut Whitney, who was traveling with his own tent show, Whitney and Bernard's Troubadours. The Whitney incorporated the animals into his show. Shortly afterwards, these two showmen organized Silas Green for New Orleans, the legendary tent show that would provide a stage for black performers, Nefertites, and proven stars for decades. From 1905 until just before his death in 1921, Williams ran the show independently. Subsequently, it was purchased by white promoters and toured the South and Midwest, until the early 1950s. In an essay on the avant-garde saxophonist Ornette Coleman, who toured with the Silas Green troupe during the 40s as a blues musician, and the jazz critic A.B. Spellman provided a description of the famous tent show during its decline. As an adolescent in Elizabeth, North Carolina, he wrote, I recall crawling under the canvas tents of the Silas Green from New Orleans to watch the semi-naked women do their dances and to hear the comedians' crude, but I thought then hilariously funny jokes. By 1950, the company was seedy. Its canvas tent was ragged, its dancers somewhat shop-worn. The Negroes who lived in Elizabeth City seldom attended Silas Green shows. The group drew its biggest revenue from the country people who lined the city streets on weekends. We had radio, and most of the country people did not. We also had a movie house. Fights were frequent. Gambling always took place behind the tents. Every big actor of Harlem has at some time or another played with Silas Green, Tut wrote in 1936. In fact, from 1890 through World War I, black road shows provided the primary proving ground for the host of comedians who surfaced in black theaters and in films during the 20s. These road shows, playing before primarily black audiences, were like a rich underground spring that nurtured a form of black stage comedy more closely aligned to the authentic humor of black folks. Removed from the expectations of white audiences and often from the pressures of white promoters, black comedians working in traveling shows before black patrons could and gradually did alter the image of the poverty, banality, and ignorance that characterized minstrel humor, as well as much of the humor seen in mainstream arenas such as vaudeville and Broadway musicals. And to think, that people hold this Broadway stuff up to such a high standard, but this is what they were showing, the bullshit, the blackface, the minstrelsies. Man. But it goes to show you the things that I'll say people to do. The things that people, but it's talking about us, our people, do to get themselves out of a situation. One of the areas where slight alterations appeared first was in song lyrics. Black minstrel and medicine show road companies initially offered the same stereotypical images found in the coon song prevalent in white shows. Gradually, however, black composers, nearly all of them also performers, began altering the lyrics, using the popular song idiom that get in the barb or two. During this period, it was common practice to accommodate the specific taste of a given audience, just as white companies no doubt increased the intensity of ridicule directed at blacks when they appeared before rural southern white crowds. Black performers changed their own songs and those written by others when they played to black audiences. Moreover, black composers such as Irving Jones occasionally produced humorous songs that belied the fashionable stereotypes and did have sardonic bite. Jones, when a coon sits in his president's chair, St. Patrick's Day is a bad day for coons, and you needn't think I'm a Regular Fool, all published around the turn of the century. Although they adhered to some coon song cliches, provided alternatives to the persistent chicken stealing, razor toting images preferred in most of the era's popular songs. As Paul Oliver noted, songsters could trade on white fears and fantasies and mock them. Even more directly, on the minstrel and medicine show stage, points could be made that arose out of both content and situation. The sociologist Arthur F. Raper's report of the minstrel show in Oglethorpe, Georgia, for instance, affirms the practice. The whole troupe was doing a twisting, jiggling dance, which was followed by a dialogue in which a black boy pleaded for the attention of a mulatto girl, who only to be refused with, "Who, me? Why, you don't know who I am. My daddy's the biggest planter in Georgia." Later, during a sketch in which the performer sang, "I'll leave my gun at home," according to Raper, it seemed quite accidental that he was pointing straight to the white man when he came to this line. "I'll leave my gun at home if you'll leave my wife alone." While this kind of assertive redirection of minstrelsy's racially demeaning humor was by no means revolutionary, it does demonstrate the shifts that performers gradually insinuated into their acts. These road shows were the forerunners of the theater owner booking associated, and as we shall see, it was on the black theatrical circuit that the changes began in tent shows came to fruition. Many of the comedians who worked the early road shows emerged later as black entertainment superstars. For instance, Tim Moore, the veteran comic who starred in vaudeville and Broadway musical comedies before taking on the role of Kingfish in Amos and Andy television show in the 1950s, began his career in Dr. Mick's traveling medicine show in 1900. Pigmeat Markham joined the minstrel company in 1917 and performed in tent shows and carnivals before his "Here Come the Judge" routine made him famous. Jackie Moms Mabley debuted as a blackface comedian in tent shows. It's just spelled funny. Comedienne. Comedian in tent shows in the early 1900s prior to her success in musical comedies, and as a stand-up comic, Matten Moreland, who starred in more than 300 films and on stage often teamed with Nipsey Russell and Red Fox, comedians whose careers extended well into the television era. Began his career with the traveling circus in 1915. Jody Edwards, Butterbeans of Butterbeans and Susie, one of the first and most famous black husband and wife comedy teams, began in a pickaninny bit in the Moss Brothers Carnival in 1910. Bill Bojangles Robinson began performing on street corners as a teenager in 1890s before graduating to tent shows, traveling black musical comedies, and finally becoming Hollywood sidekick to Shirley Temple and the toast of Broadway in the 1930s. And Stephen Fetching, Hollywood's most successful Sambo figure, started his show business career as a comic in the Plantation show of a traveling carnival in 1913. Just as black road shows in the rural South benefited from increased popularity of syncopated music, black musicians and entertainers in urban areas advanced their careers. Southern black musicians flocked to the North, finding jobs in urban cafes, cabarets, and restaurants, whose clientele lusted for the new dance music. Although, as Amari Baraka points out, they basically played light, diluted versions of authentic black music, ignoring more serious jazz-oriented forms such as Scott Joplin's classic rags. These were performed to the string orchestras that previously held sway. In 1910, for instance, James R. Europe was instrumental in organizing the Clef Club, a New York City-based Black Musicians Association that, besides forming its own extremely successful symphony orchestra, helped provide bookings for its members and associated them when they were unemployed. The Clef Club was so effective that a few years after the inception, Black orchestras were playing in many of the private ballrooms of first class restaurants and hotels, as well as in the most of the dance halls along Broadway. Europe, in fact, was the musical arranger for Irene and Vernon Castle, the white dance team who popularized Black dances such as the turkey trot in the teens, and directed the orchestra to their dance saloon. Shortly before Europe was killed by a knife wielding drummer in 1919, violinist and band leader Will Marion Cook, another Clef Club member, had formed the New York City Orchestra and was performing at large music halls in major cities throughout the North as well as overseas. And in 1920, when broadcast radio debuted, Clef Club bands were featured on early programs. Musically, Black performers were making great strides in the mainstream entertainment world. In comedy, however, vaudeville houses and Broadway theaters presented a dilemma for Black performers. The white audiences there were accustomed to seeing the familiar minstrel image, and white owners and producers ensured that they were not disappointed. So the performers who initially broke the color line here were forced to reflect the old stereotypes if they wanted to work. Yet, as crossover entertainers, their ascent was crucial to the evolution of Black comedy entertainment. Their capitulation to minstrel images should be weighed against the gains they made for Black performers in the long run. During the 1890s, vaudeville supplanted minstrelsy as America's major popular entertainment form. B.F. Keith opened the prototype for the new, respectable vaudeville theater in Boston in 1818. And in 1893, he leased the Union Square Theater and established himself in New York City. Soon he had developed a network of theaters from the East Coast to Chicago. The Keats Circuit worked in association with Martin Beck Orpheum Circuit, which controlled major vaudeville houses west and south of Chicago. These well-organized circuits dominated vaudeville, although some independent theaters did book vaudeville acts. From their inception, the Keith and Orpheum circuits sought to define vaudeville in contrast to the rowdy, sometimes vulgar, and salacious entertainment offered in minstrelsy and in variety shows. Oh, variety houses, my bad. Keith demanded that the acts playing at his theaters conform to rigid controls. According to one contemporary journalist, every word that is spoken or sung, gestures, pantomime, costumes, everything that goes to make up an act undergoes a censorship infinitely more rigid than exercised in any high-priced legitimate theater. In fact, Keats' censoring of remarks and gestures that were even slightly off color and his insistence upon constantly pristine humor led some old variety comics to label vaudeville comedy Keats' anemia. Keith had set out to create comfortable, spacious theaters offering polite entertainment that would attract family audiences, and initially he did so. The Keith and Orpheum Circuit, the Keith and Orpheum Circuit offered popular music, comedy, and variety acts that drew on a cross-the-board audience which included women and children. Some independents strayed from this strict code, but by and large, vaudeville theaters conformed to the ideal of polite entertainment and bright, clean accommodations that contrasted with the earthy atmosphere of most variety houses. Ooh, I'm stumbling tonight, baby. We're going to push. Under the control of the Keith and Orpheum circuits, Big time vaudeville flourished from the late 1890s through the early 1920s. In about 1935, however, succumbing to competition from network radio in 1926 and sound films in 1929, for sure, and the sale of the Keith Orpheum Circuit to the Road Corporation of America, the merger produced RKO in the 30s. The vaudeville era came to an end. Before its demise, vaudeville produced an illustrious group of entertainers. Among them are Sarah Bernhardt, Charlie Chaplin, Will Rogers, Al Jolson, Ed Wynn, Eddie Cantor, Sophie Tucker, Jimmy Durant, W.C. Fields, Fred Allen, Mae West, Buster Keaton, Joe E. Brown, the Marx Brothers, James Cagney, Wilton Burrow, Jack Benny, Fred Astaire, and Bob Hope. Many of these performers would dominate show business until the second half of the 20th century. As the preponderance of the comedians on the list suggests, comedy was one of the mainstays of vaudeville theater. Comic routines that became classics in film, radio, and stage in the mid-20th century were developed there. They range from Charlie Chaplin's bizarre, penguin-like strut and Groucho Marx's inimitable cigar-chopping leer to Milton Berle's quick-paced one-liners. Girl, why don't you kiss me the way you used to? Burl, why don't you wash your neck the way you used to? You have a face like a saint. Girl, like a saint. Burl, like a Saint Bernard. But only the most celebrated and talented Black performers initially had access to the big-time vaudeville circuits. Bert Williams, who may be considered the best comedian of all time, was one of the first. His talent and genius was recognized almost from the instant he and his partner George Walker arrived in New York. Walker's contribution was his radiant personality and exuberant interpretation of the new urban Black style. His high-stepping dance routine was, according to the critics, unmatched in its energy and flourish, and his portrayal of the coveting. Let's see what that is. Conniving. 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 And I've been told that before, to slow down the reading. Sometimes it's kind of hard, for me at least. I can slow it down for a little while, and then I can feel the pace get to kicking back up until I stumble. Conniving. Connon. Sometimes reading slow make me feel slow, like conniving. To pretend. I'm tripping. Conniving. To pretend ignorance of something one should condemn. To be culpably cooperative. Conniving. And his portrayal of the conniving, fun-loving dandy always tempting his partner with some outrageous get-rich-quick scheme, was perfect. He thrived on the part, bringing to it and flamboyance he observed in the black community that he so relished. Williams had met Walker in San Francisco in 1893. They performed in traveling shows in the Midwest for a time. Then one of the producers of Victor Herbert's The Gold Bug saw them at a small hotel in Indiana. He asked them to return to New York and join the shows as a specialty act, billing themselves as two real coons. Sound like two real niggas. Yeah, I know spiritual. I believe it helps you. It helps me too. It honestly does help me too. It helps me read and not stumble over the words as much. It's just hard for me to keep a slower pace when I'm listening to myself read. It's hard for me to keep a slower. Well, it seems hard. I'll say it like that. It seems hard. You're probably not the only one that has an issue with it. So, being that you're not the first person that has said, that I can take that critique. I can take that. The show closed shortly afterward, so they turned to vaudeville and quickly became one of the most sought after and popular acts on the circuit. It was in their vaudeville act at Coster and Bowles Independent Theater that they popularized the cakewalk. By 1898, the team had left vaudeville for the legitimate theater and musical comedy. But during their 2 years of vaudeville appearances, Williams and Walker established themselves as one of the foremost comedy dance acts in show business. Later, after George Walker's death, Williams would return to vaudeville briefly before becoming the star of the Ziegfeld Follies. Late in his career, veteran minstrel performer Ernest Hogan also became a headline attraction on the vaudeville stage. After years of minstrelsy and appearances in such traveling shows as Smart Set, Black Patty's Troubadours, and his own independently produced shows, Hogan had convinced producers and critics that he was an exceptional comedian. He debuted on the Keats circuit in the early 1900s. His most successful stint was in Rufus Rastus, which was produced in 1905. Bill Bojangles Robinson also moved from minstrels and variety houses to independent vaudeville theaters and then to Keats Union Square Theater in the early 1900s. By the early 20s, he had become the headliner at New York's Palace Theater, where he is said to have introduced his trademark staircase dance routine. The team of Bob Cole and J. Rosamond Johnson was also a headline act in vaudeville. Cole was justifiably better known for his work as a musician and composer than as a comedian, but he did establish himself as a formidable actor and comic. Early in his career, he had developed an act that featured comic monologue, rare for black comics until Burt Williams, in addition to his singing and guitar accompaniment. And by the late 19th century, he had developed a tramp character that would be famous as Willie Wayside in The Trip to Coontown in 1898. Written and produced with his partner, Billy Johnson. After dissolving his partnership with Johnson in 1901, Cole teamed up with J.R. Johnson, a talented pianist, singer, and composer. J.R. Johnson, related to former partner Billy, was the brother of James Weldon Johnson, the lyricist, poet, author, and civil rights leader who became the head of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the NAACP. By 1905, Cole and Johnson had become the most popular songwriting team in America. I wonder if they're in the book. Let's see. J.R. Johnson. Let's look it up. Let's see if he's in here. in the Encyclopedia of African American Heritage by Susan Altman. Let's see if they're in here. J.R. Johnson. Johnson, boys. Johnson. So quite a few Johnsons. I think with James Wendell is in here though. What was his name? Billy Johnson. Henry Johnson, Andrew Johnson, Jack Johnson, James Wendell Johnson. After dissolving the partnership with J.R., there you go, was the brother of James Wendell Johnson. 126. Let's see if we get an image of him. There you go at the bottom. James Wendell Johnson. This is a picture taken from the Library of Congress. James Wendell Johnson. Let me mark my spot first. Oh, shit. Let me mark where I'm at. Boom. James Wendell Johnson, writer, lyricist, civil rights leader, diplomat. Born in Jacksonville, Florida, James Wendell Johnson went to Atlanta University, became a high school principal, and in 1898 was the first African-American lawyer admitted to the Florida Bar Association. In 1895, he founded and edited the first African-American daily newspaper in the United States. Moving to New York City in 1901, he attended classes at Columbia University and worked with his brother, John Rosamond Johnson, in writing over 200 songs, including what is often called the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing in 1900. After writing the song, You're All Right, Teddy, You're All Right, Teddy, for Teddy Roosevelt in 1904 presidential campaign, he was appointed to consular post in Venezuela in 1906 to 1908 and Nicaragua in 1909 to 1913. During this period, he wrote his only novel, The Autobiography of an Ex-Colored Man in 1912, an indictment of racial injustice. It's some more, but that's all I'm going to read right now. It's about another 2 paragraphs. But that's what's up. It does talk about later on in other 2 paragraphs about him being in the NAACP. A major leader of the Harlem Renaissance, Johnson regularly used his position with the NAACP Crisis magazine and his connections with white publishers and producers to promote African American artists, writers, and performers. His own work includes God's Trombones, 7 Negro Sermons in Verse in 1927. He also completed a 1930 history book, Black Manhattan. I wonder what that's about. From 1930, he was a professor at Fisk University in Tennessee, where he wrote his autobiography, Along This Way. His faculty residence at Fisk is now a National Historic Landmark. That's what's up. I'm going to keep that right there just in case. By 1905, Cole and Johnson had become the most popular songwriting team in America. In 1906, they produced a Shoe Fly Regiment, which opened in Washington, D.C., and after touring the South, had a brief but undistinguished engagement with the Bijou, Bijou at the Bijou Theater on Broadway in 1907. I'm gonna pronounce it Bijou, 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 Bijou. Let's say Bijou. A year later, they produced The Red Moon, which ran successfully for one season on Broadway and another on the road. Neither of these shows was noted for their original comedy. Instead, critics praised the rousing dancing and scantily music. Scintillating. Let's see what that is. Scintillating. Let's see how we pronounce that. Scintillating music. Scintillating. SCINT. Scintillating.
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 Sparkling and shining brightly. Scintillating. Let me write it down. SCINTILLATING. Scintillating. Instead, critics praised the rousing, dancing, and sparkling or shining brightly music. The audience loved his scintillating wit, the scintillating sun. The critics praised the rousing dance and scintillating music, sparkling and shining music, scintillating. The two men wrote for many successful white musical comedies of the period and had an impressive list of hits, among them Under the Bamboo Tree, which was based on an old spiritual, Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. Didn't He Ramble? And The Maiden with the Dreamy Eyes. Their popularity as songwriters led to vaudeville appearances on the Keats circuit, in which their music and Cole's comedy made them headline attractions. They left vaudeville to write and produce musical comedies in 1906, but after the closing of The Red Moon in 1910, returned for another successful tour. Cole's show business career ended shortly after when he had a nervous breakdown while performing in New York. Months later, August 1911, he drowned while convalescing. He drowned while convalescing in the Catskills. Convalescing. I know I'm pronouncing it wrong. CON, a bunch of C words tonight I'm missing. CONVALESCING. I bet it's something I already know. Convalescing. Convoluted. Convalescing. Convalescence. I knew it sounded familiar.
Convalesce.
Yeah, I thought so. Convalescing. Recover one's health and strength over a period of time after an illness or operation. He drowned while recovering one's health in the Catskills. He drowned while recovering one's health and strength over a period of time after an illness, which was his mental breakdown. Convalescing. He drowned while convalescing in the Catskills. These performers were among a few select Black acts that headlined big-time vaudeville during its early years. Others were booked by smaller vaudeville circuits and independents, but bookings were scarce on the Keith Orphan bills. When he did occur, only one black act was permitted in a show. Damn. Managers feared that their white family clientele, already anxious about the influx of blacks into urban areas, would react negatively. White performers complained about having to work with blacks, and if the black act was extraordinary, as was certainly the case with Williams and Walker, whites objected to following it on the bill. I can't follow that. You got them niggas up there dancing and diving. You want me to follow them niggas? White blackface comedians also balked at appearing with traditional black minstrels, such as Ernest Hogan and Tom McIntosh. Despite their resistance, many headline black acts became established as vaudeville performers in the later years. Among them, the former Our Gang child star, Ernie Sunshine Morrison, and the teams of Flournoy, Miller, and Aubrey Lyles, and Ubi Blake and Noble Sissel. After appearing in silent films from 1922 to 1924, Morris, at age 10, left the Our Gang series when he was offered a 3-year vaudeville contract. Billed as Sunshine Sammy, he performed on stage into the 1930s. In the 40s, he returned to the screen of Scruno in the East Side Kid series. The most influential black comedy team early in the century was without doubt Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles. Miller and Lyles began their careers as playwrights in Chicago in 1905, but by 1908 had created their own act. They starred in their own productions at Robert T. Matt's Petkin Theater on Chicago's South Side and played so-called black vaudeville houses in the Midwest before coming to New York, where in 1910 they opened at the Hamstein Victoria Theater, an independent vaudeville house. They continued as vaudeville performers until they moved on to musical comedy in the 1915 production Dark Kingdom, and later as producers in the groundbreaking 1921 black publication Shuffle Along. Ragtime pianist Ubi Blake and singer-lyricist Noble Sissel worked with Keith Orphan circuit in the late teens. Then, in 1920, joined Miller and Lyles to write the music for Shuffle Song. While in vaudeville, they billed themselves as a Dixie Duo. They were one of the most acclaimed acts on the circuit. Their act featured Blake's superb ragtime piano playing and Sissel singing. Unlike almost all the other black vaudeville performers, they did not work in blackface. Along with Cole and Miller, they were also immensely successful as songwriters, producing tones for such vaudeville stars as Sophie Tucker. Now, Aubrey Blake's career extended until the 1970s, when he was rediscovered and largely unfamiliar with ragtime. Oh, my bad, I skipped the whole sentence. When he was rediscovered and, through television talk shows, was introduced to a generation that was largely unfamiliar with ragtime or the hit black musical Shuffle Along. Black shows broke the color line on Broadway a few years after Burt Williams' debut in vaudeville. 3 months after the Trip to Coontown debuted off Broadway in 1989, another black show, Clorinda, or The Origin of the Cakewalk, opened at the Casino Roof Garden on Broadway. The show was written by Will Marion Cook, an outstanding composer, as well as an acclaimed violinist and bandleader, and the famed black poet Paul Laurence Dunbar. It was hailed for its ragtime rhythms and powerful choral works, but predictably Also featured comic songs like Who That Say Chicken Is This Crowd, delivered by the show's star comedian Ernest Hogan. Later, Cook would write of the success of the show. Negroes were at last on Broadway and there to stay. Gone was the oomph day of the minstrel. Gone was Massa Lincoln stuff. Nothing could stop us, and nothing did for a decade. In fact, although the Master Lincoln stuff was far, far gone, black musical comedies were to have immense influence on the Broadway stage for more than a decade. The primary reason for this impact was the entry of Burt Williams and George Walker into the musical comedy field. After the success of Bob Cole and Will Marion Cook in 1898, Williams and Walker formed a black production company and made their first musical comedy appearance in A Lucky Coon and a Senegambian Carnival. Those shows and their next effort, The Policy Players in 1900, were only mildly successful. But in 1902, their producer in Dahomey, it sounds like the Dahomey tribe in that Woman King movie, the Dahomey, which opened at the New York Theater and Broadway after receiving outstanding reviews on the road. The show set out to celebrate African aspects of Black American culture. In reality, it was a simple farce about African recolonization, which Williams, Skylark Homestead, is duped into posing as a detective and helping Walker, Rareback Pinkerton, attempt to con a rich Southerner into financing a Back to Africa scheme. New York critics raved. After a European tour in 1903, the show was taken on the road in the United States and toured successfully for 2 more years. In 1906, Williams and Walker produced their most extravagant show, Abyssinia, which had the elaborately staged African setting that included live camels. Following their usual partner, Walker was featured as a flashy dandy and Williams as a bedraggled inept bumpkin. It was here that Williams introduced the hit song, Nobody, music by Williams and lyrics by Alex Rogers. The show opened at the Majestic Theater and was greeted with critical acclaim. Bandanaland, their next venture, opened in 1908 and was their biggest hit, despite a controversial storyline. It was one of the first major theatrical productions in which a black trickster engaged a white adversary and won out. For the most part, white managers had kept their hands off this time. A critic from the Brooklyn Eagle observed it as genuine and honest, and what matters most for the audience, it is so funny that you will laugh yourself tired. Anyone who loves laughter but stays away from Bandanaland in fear that it is an ordinary rough and tumble darky show will make an unfortunate mistake. Like the 2 previous works, the book was written by the actor and playwright Jesse Shipp. It was a satire on Black life in the South that revolved around the adventures of a Black couple who formed the corporation and buy land in a white neighborhood. After moving in, the pair throw wild parties so the whites will buy the property back at inflated prices. The highlights were Will Marion Cook's syncopatic music, Walker's inimitable cakewalk, and the introduction of Williams' classic poker game routine, in which his memes or mimes, alone, individual player poker with a group of imaginary friends. That routine, along with the forlorn rendition of Nobody, would become Williams' comic staples. The success of the Williams and Walker productions significantly influenced Black performers' acceptance on the Broadway and the vaudeville stage. But the deaths of Bob Cole and George Walker in 1911, along with the loss of Ernest Hogan, who had died in 1909 after collapsing during a performance of his new show, The Oyster Man, contributed heavily to the decline of black musical comedies during the next decade. The years from 1890 to 1921 were a roller coaster era for black performers, a golden age from 1890 to 1910, a virtual washout from 1911 to 1920, and a revival in 1921. Yet, throughout these facilitations, diluted forms of black dance and music made significant inroads into popular entertainment. Now, after 1921, black-inspired dances would again become the dominant force at social gatherings as well as in most popular musical reviews. Although black music comedies disappeared from Broadway stages for more than a decade after the closing of Mr. Load of Coal in 1909 and The Red Moon in 1910, black performers were visibly active beyond the Great White Way. For instance, J. Homer Tutt and his brother Salem Tutt Whitney, who helped create the Silas Green from New Orleans Roadshow, produced, directed, and wrote 16 musical comedies during that period. In 1915, Darkdom, produced by Lester Walton and written by Jesse Shipp and James R. Europe, opened in the Howard Theater in Washington, D.C., and later that year played at Harlem's Lafayette Theater. The show starred the fast-rising comedy team of Flournoy Williams and Aubrey Lyles, and was touted as the best black musical comedy since Bandana Land by some critics. That same year, Flournoy's brother, Irwin C. Miller, produced Broadway Rosters, which opened in Atlantic City and featured the music of W.C. Handy. These shows, like numerous other all-black cast musicals produced during that period, played primarily at black-owned theaters, such as Robert T. Mott's Pekin in Chicago, or in houses like the Lafayette and Lincoln in Harlem, which welcomed black patrons. It was not until 1921 that black musical comedy returned to Broadway. The show that ended the hiatus was based on The Mayor of Dixie, a successful comedy that Flournoy Miller and Aubrey Lyles had created and starred in at Mott Pekin Theater in 1907. As Shuffle Along, the show opened at the 63rd Street Theater on May 23rd of 1921. Within weeks, it was a sensation of New York, ushering in a new era of successful black musicals on Broadway and establishing the prototype for the shows that would follow. Raising money had been difficult, since most whites doubted that a new black musical could attract white audiences. So, at the outset, Lyles and Miller were forced to underwrite most of their expenses themselves. The show worked on a shoestring budget as it previewed in black areas outside of New York. Although this was a hardship for the creative team, it paid off in other ways. Lacking the backing and consequent interference of white financiers during their formative stages, few concessions were made to white taste in either music or dance. In order to expand their original show, Miller and Lyles had sought out Ubi Blake and Noble Sissel. In addition, they expanded the chorus line, presenting a group of glamorous women who, unlike the chorus girls in white shows, actually danced instead of simply standing on display, like some mannequins. In fact, Josephine Baker's comic antics, clowning, stumbling, rolling her eyes on the end of the chorus line not only made her a featured attraction and instant star, but set the precedent for inline humor and chorus lines. The music and dance, heavily steeped in the tradition of black variety shows, astounded Broadway audiences, and critics raved. Langston Hughes described it as swift, bright, funny, rollicking, and gay, with a dozen danceable, singable tunes. Blake's ragtime-oriented rhythms, less diluted than most tin-pan alley rags, provided a lively, pulsating beat that constantly fired the musical numbers and, along with Sissel's lyrics, produced a score of memorable hit tunes, among them Shuffle Along. If you've never vamped a brown-skinned vamp, then you've never vamped at all. Love Will Find a Way, In Honeysuckle Time, Gypsy Blues, Bandana Days, and I'm Just Wild with Harry, which resurfaced as a hit tune when Harry Truman used it as a campaign song during the 1984 presidential elections. The dance numbers feature routines that, although familiar on the black variety theater circuit, were new to most white patrons. The soft shoe, acrobatics, time steps, rapid fire tap dancing, shimmies, the buck and wing, and the Texas Tommy were all performed with the energy and style that had seldom, if ever, been seen on Broadway. Every sinew of their bodies danced, one critic wrote. Every tendon of their frames responded to their extreme energy. They reveled in their work. They simply posed with it, and there was no let up at all. The New York Herald Tribune critic echoed these sentiments in even more hyperbolic fashion. It was when the chorus and the principals of the company that is said to contain the best Negro troopers of these parts gets going in the dances that the world seems a brighter place to live in. They wiggle and shimmy in a fashion that outdo a congress of hills, of a congress of eels, and they fling their limbs about without stopping to make sure that they are securely fastened on. They plead justification for their wild, chorubantic revelings, for noble Cecil wrote music that is that is in aggravation for a sore feet. Man, these critics. It was clearly the energy and fresh style of the dancing and music that made Shuffle Along such a successful and ordinary show. The plot remains essentially the same as the original Mayor of Dixie, involving two friends who are running up for mayor in a small town. The humor, as was common in most Miller and Lyle shows, was closely associated with traditional minstrel comedy. Inept, stereotyped blackface characters presented the familiar verbal misuses and performed familiar coon antics. For instance, one mayoral candidate is told that the other has stopped stealing chickens. Oh, yeah, he replies. When did he die? The brightest comedy spot was the introduction of the blackboard math routine, mulsifying and revision, in which Miller attempts to prove that Lyles that 28 divided by 7 equals 13. This bit became a comic staple, and variants would be seen later in the acts of mainstream comedians such as Abbott and Costello, and of black impersonators, Gosden and Carell as Amos and Andy. Despite the overall routine comedy, Shuffle Along was a milestone production. Its unprecedented success opened the gates for the raft of black musicals that were produced during the 20s and 30s. Moreover, it presented songs and dance routines that are still being copied on the Broadway stage. And not least of the accomplishments, it featured performers such as Florence Mills and Josephine Baker, who became entertainment legends. During the Roaring Twenties, the Charleston and other new dances rooted in black culture, along with those introduced in the Shuffle Along, swept the country and dominated Broadway theater. By 1921, syncopatic music and ragtime were the accepted staples of Tin Pan Alley and the Jazz Age. Blues and jazz seized an even more steadfast grasp on America's popular music tastes. As the 1922 song intoned, in terms of music and dance, it was indeed getting very dark and old on old Broadway, and for that matter, in most other areas of the popular entertainment world. By contrast, the authentic folk humor of blacks much too revealing about real attitudes towards American bigotry and to be accepted by whites at the turn of the century, would remain far from the public eye. Despite the triumphs of early black comics, the private humor of blacks, like the hero of Ralph Ellison's novel Invisible Man, would thrive underground, as it were, ensconced in all black barbershops, honky tonks, house parties, and in a less assertive form in the acts of comedians performing before all black audiences on the black theater circuit for more than 40 years. And that was section 2 of chapter 4, Vaudeville and Black Humor, on the Real Side by Mel Watkins. History of African American comedy from slavery to Chris Rock. Yeah, some of that stuff really does make me think about the Three Stooges. It really does. Like I might need to go check out this Amos and Andy and see what Amos and Andy really was about. I remember it, but I don't. The name is familiar, but the show is not. So that's that's definitely one that I'd have to go check out. The reading slow, man. Reading slower. Oh, it irks me. It really irks me. I ain't gonna lie. I know I have to try. I know it helps. Tonight wasn't as good as I normally feel like I read, but we got through it. One section at a time, one page at a time, one chapter at a time. We will keep pushing until we get to the end, so we can grow, and then do it some more. But I'd rather read and get better at that than dance the jig, like the blackface in the minstrelsies or in a variety shows as they were doing before things got a little bit more freer, before they broke way, as they said, through Broadway and the other shows. Even looking at some of the rappers and musicians of today, even though I really don't know everything that the minstrel shows was doing, a lot of the antics that you may see from the entertainers, especially musicians, and some comedians, definitely can be the description that they give of the minstrel shows can definitely be seen by or through the actions of some of these entertainers of today. I definitely would like to get a bigger grasp of what exactly, I guess Mr. Watkins' view of the things that were taken and revamped and brought into today's time. I would like to see. I would like to see, clear examples of what they are. But I'm pretty sure it'll be right there. But these are things that most people don't care nothing about. We laugh most likely at the same shit that they was laughing at in the 1800s when the minstrel shows was going from place to place, and they were showing the Sambos and I forgot who the lady was. The Sambos and the other so say coon songs and jigs and stuff. We still see them dancing a jig. Shit. In Louisiana, that's the dance, the jig. You jigging. Get your jig on. So we can see how some of the names are still here. They just like they say, what goes around comes around. History repeats itself. These are some of the things they say, and most times it's clear to see. It's clear to see. It's right in front of your face. It's right under your nose. But we choose, because I know a lot of us, including me, for a long time, choose not to read certain things so that way we could get a better understanding of where we have been to see where we are going to go, And it seems like we're gonna go right back to where the hell we was if we continue on the path of not making the adjustments that need to be made so we can grow mentally, as well as physically, but mentally for sure. But but so far so good. Like I said, one page at a time, one section at a time, one chapter at a time on the real side till we finish the book. We're still doing good. I'm thinking about halfway. We almost halfway. We are almost halfway through the book, and that is a definitely a big milestone. I think where we at is a big milestone right now. We are on page 164. We're 164 pages in. 164 pages in. We'll keep pushing. Thank you for putting up with the stumbles. Um, I'll definitely keep working at, I guess the presentation of the readings. Try to make it better. I'll definitely keep working at trying to make the reading better itself. I'm telling you, I hate stumbling over words. Even though I stop and I look up certain words that I don't know, I think I'm mispronouncing the words. I still hate doing that. But hey, you can't get no better if you don't try to adjust to the areas that you're weakest at. And I know at some of these words, I'd be, oh man, I'm weak. I'm weak at pronouncing some of the words correctly. But hey, time and practice. Time and practice. Time and practice. I definitely would say that from the jump, reading this book has been like reading, I would say, like the Chronicles in the Bible when it comes to all the names of the people. Trying to read all the Hebrew names of the people, back to back, man. I stumbled over a lot of those names. Just like I'm pretty sure I messed up some of the names of the comedians in this book, but some of them I know. Some of them are familiar. I can remember once I read them. I'll be like, okay, I remember. I remember hearing about this person or that person. Some people I don't know. Which is why it makes me grab that African American Heritage book, which I didn't even think was gonna come in handy. Man, that book been sitting on my shelf, and I never thought I was gonna be able to use it for real, for real. I mean, Black History Month, whatever. But to see that it has um, some of these people, at least some of these people, where I can even look up, have pictures, so I can see what they look like at that time, as well as maybe a little brief summary about them, other than what it may give in the book, which the book may follow along with some of that summary that they give on a person. I think it's coming in handy right now for this book, so I'll keep referring to it. Especially the older people. The new people I know, when it comes to Dave Chappelle and Chris Rock and Red Fox, Richard Pryor, those I know. Uh, those people I know. I don't know, if everybody knows them, but those I know. So I don't really need to refer to that. But like for Mr. James Weldon Johnson, or even some of the other people we have looked up, over the last couple of sessions of reading, definitely has come in handy. It definitely has come in handy. But what time it is? 3. Yeah. I appreciate both of you, whoever I know one of you. I appreciate you, whoever the second person is that's that's been in the live. And I appreciate you holding it down in the live. I hope you enjoyed section 2 of chapter 4. And we'll most likely, Lord willing, I'll come back tomorrow. I really think that nighttime is gonna be my, I really been trying to find the time, and nighttime really seems like the time. I don't want it to be this late. It just so happens, it just so happened to be this late. But I think around 9:30, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Once the boys are in the bed, they'll be in the bed by 9. So once the boys are in the bed, I can get a good read in. I normally be feeling good about reading about that time. So I'm gonna try to shoot. I don't wanna lie, man. I don't wanna lie. But nighttime, if I can get on a routine with the time wise and keep to that time, that'll be great. But nighttime for sure definitely be the times I'll be shooting for to reach. I mean to read. If I'm up, I'll come on and read and get it out the way. I don't like it to be late, but I'm glad somebody was in here up with me so I didn't fall asleep. But until next time, man, appreciate y'all. Appreciate y'all. For everybody that catch it on the rebound, like, comment, subscribe, man. Let me know what you think. Let me know if it's something that you may have learned or heard that you didn't know about. Leave a comment on the video. Help the algorithm, as they say. Whatever. The likes will help as well, so we can keep growing the channel, and hopefully I can keep growing in the knowledge and understanding of words. How to read better. I really want, it's a certain way as I'm reading it, it's like I'm battling within myself because it's a certain way I want to read it. Also, it's a certain way I want to hear it. And sometimes the reading slower, how can I say? Like when I'm reading and I'm going down the page, when I see the pages turning, like as I'm turning the pages and they turning pretty quickly, and I'm moving, I feel like I'm moving through it. I'm not really, stumbling that much, not really having to look up too many words, and I see the pages turning, that kind of boosts me. That boosts me. It gives me a little bit more like oomph behind it. Oh man, I'm doing it. Let's get through it. Oh yeah, we can get through it. But when I read slower and it slows down the page turning, it kind of, yeah, that don't make me feel as good, and I don't hear it as good. I mean, I hear it, but the inflections in my voice that I want to hear, or and I know maybe reading it beforehand, I know people will say that, but I'm trying to give my authentic take on what's being read as well, But if I read over it once or twice, but I can't even imagine right now reading over this thing before I read it to y'all. Oh Lord, one day I'll get there. One day I'll get there. For like some speed readers who could probably read this whole book in a day, 2 days maybe. I don't know. I'm not there yet. But I think that's live. I don't think I got it in me to do not right now to do, like I see some people I saw, when looking at other people who read books, they have read whole books in 5-hour stints. And I just don't see it. Man, that sleep monster knocking me out, man. It'll work on me. It'll knock me out. And then the up and down of the reading, I might get to a part where I'm feeling good, and then once I start getting tired, then the reading will start going down. So I try to keep it within an hour time frame, so that way, I shouldn't have. It should be kind of more consistent all the way through. More consistent all the way through. But like I said, until next time, man. Until next time, we'll keep pushing. We'll keep pushing on the real side, so we can get through it and move on to the next book, which most likely will be The Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. Another big book. Another thick one to me. Maybe not to y'all, but to me. Yeah, we'll go ahead and these small letters, man. I might need glasses or something, man. Them letters look small. Ooh, I mean, these look a little bit bigger. They look a little bit bigger. But these, oh Lord, look at the contrast. Oh Lord, man. But despite them being small, we'll make it do what it do. And we'll push through. We'll push through. Another one I'm interested to see what they're talking about. I heard multiple people have said there's a lot of info in here. The only thing I'm thinking about is the medical words. Like it's probably going to be a lot of medical words in here for the treatments that they tried upon the people. But we'll get to it. We'll get to it another time, another day, another time after we finish. So hope y'all have a nice night. Good day whenever y'all see this. Spiritual conversationist. Hey, appreciate it. Keep holding it down. Shalom.